Hi, my name is Josh Ryer. I'm the Director of Utility Programs and Initiatives here at Connecticut PURA, which stands for the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. I'll be walking you through today a presentation that really outlines our Equitable Modern Grid initiative here at PURA, which is our version of grid modernization. Before I start, I just have to give a quick disclaimer that nothing in this presentation is intended to be legal advice of any nature. It's really just for informational purposes to give everybody a high-level understanding of PURA's objectives and process related to the Equitable Modern Grid. So with that disclaimer, where I want to start is just a brief outline to help everyone kind of context set what my office does within PURA. So the Office of Utility Programs and Initiatives, as it says in the name, has oversight over the utility programs that are run, statutory programs that are run by the utilities, and then also initiatives such as our grid modernization initiative, the Equitable Modern Grid. And so within my office, there's two units. There's the Clean and Affordable Energy Unit, which is led by Stephanie Cohane, and then the Reliability, Security, and Resilience Unit, which is led by Steve Capozzi. And both of those units oversee utility programs, but as a whole, the office is responsible for the Equitable Modern Grid initiative and other initiatives that we try and look at a comprehensive level through the lens of both units. So a quick overview of what I'll go over today. So back in 2017, there was an initial grid planning docket that was opened by PURA, docket 171203. So I'll start there, and then I'll move on to what we are now calling the Equitable Modern Grid initiative that we're leading that's out of that same docket, and really start with the interim decision in 171203 from October of 2019 that really set the objectives of what we're trying to achieve with the Equitable Modern Grid and all of the different topics that come out of that. I'll walk through some of the specific topics that came out of that interim decision back in October of 2019. And then we'll dive into a little bit of the iterative distribution system planning process that we envision to really culminate this whole process and bring together all of the pieces that we're investigating currently under the Equitable Modern.
All right, so I think the first place to start with our grid planning process is a docket 171203, and all of our grid planning for everyone that wants to go away and get into the details and the weeds of these dockets later. Everything is actually under this one docket 171203. So this docket was initiated at the end of 2017, but really didn't get going in earnest until the second half of 2018. And really what that was Connecticut's first look at grid, holistic, concerted effort to investigate distribution system planning in the state of Connecticut. And so really the focus of that effort was on just level setting, right? What data do we have? What data do we not have? What do the utilities do? What processes do they have? We have two main utilities in Connecticut. We have United Illuminating, which is an Avangrid subsidiary, and then we have Eversource, which is about an 80-20 split Eversource UI. So get a sense of what the different companies had, their capabilities, their processes, back-end data management systems, all the works. So that was level setting, and then really the conclusion of that process that had several technical meetings and stakeholder meetings during it ended with briefs at the end of 2018. And for those of you that are familiar with Connecticut politics and our gubernatorial cycle, we had a new governor that was elected at the end of 2018 and started in 2019. And actually the chair of PURA at the time then became the commissioner of DEEP. So in early 2019, we went through a change in leadership at PURA. And the reason I cite that, and I'm going to move to kind of the process that we have in front of us now is, so this docket was really kind of the level setting for what we had, but really that, how that the plan for that docket is now, I guess, being incorporated into this broader vision that we took, and that I'll get into in a second. So when we had we took a step back in 2019. Like I mentioned, there's change in leadership, but also we had all this great data. What did we want to do with the data and information that we had in front of us, right? So really what we, like I said, we took a step back and we said, okay, so what are we trying to achieve here? Do we just want to have a robust distribution plan? Do we want to have transparent processes, or is this something broader that we're trying to achieve here? So we looked at really the relevant state policy goals. What we were looking at about the same time as the slide that mentions our framework for an equitable modern grid that's in front of you. There was an executive order 3 that came from Governor Lamont that directed DEEP, not PURA, to evaluate a pathway to a zero carbon electric grid by 2040. So really taking that into consideration, what are we trying to achieve here, and let's think about where we're starting and what we're trying to achieve. So on October 2nd of 2019, we issued what we called the Framework for an Equitable Modern Grid, which really outlined a couple of things. First off, what the objectives as we saw it for distribution system planning and grid modernization for Connecticut within that broader context of where are we trying to get, which really is 100% zero carbon grid by 2040, amongst other important goals. So it lays out, okay, what are our objectives, but then also it lays out a process and specific topics that we're going to look at to try and get us there. And let's go to the next slide. And I think the importance, I'll just pause here for a second. I think the importance of, and what you'll see throughout this presentation, there's lots of different ways that we could have gone from setting, and this is exactly, it sounds like the process that you all are going through right now. There's lots of different ways we could have gone from setting our objectives and then trying to get to where we wanted to go, right? That pathway from objectives to reaching our end goals. There's lots of different ways we could have gotten there, or planned to try and get there. I think what we landed on was there's really a few key topics that we thought were important that we needed to push forward first and really get that off the ground, and then bring that into a more integrated distribution system plan later, because we already had a baseline for our distribution system planning. We need to push forward some of these, and there ended up being 11 topics, so maybe not a few. Few's not the right word there. 11 topics that we really want to have a concerted effort to push forward first, and then to integrate that later with, and to push forward really, the processes that we learned about in the first docket that I mentioned. And hopefully there's some diagrams that'll make all of that clear. So let me take another step back. So the objectives that we landed on, based on the policy objectives and statutes and recent legislation in Connecticut were fourfold. The first was to enable an economy-wide decarbonization. Like I said before, we have kind of this implicit goal at this point of 100% zero carbon goal by 2040. But of course, this goal is an economy-wide decarbonization, and we have statewide decarbonization goal of an 80% reduction by 2050. So what's our part in that? And let's make sure we're doing what we need to do to get the distribution system ready for that and there, on schedule, if not ahead of schedule. And then second, I'm just going to go from top to the right there, was providing a more resilient, reliable, secure commodity, right? So traditionally, what we are tasked with doing and ensuring, but where can we improve that? Obviously, with climate change, we're seeing an increase in severe storms and the impact of those. So how do we provide a more resilient, a better product, really? I think that fits naturally then in with the bottom objective, which is again a traditional objective of more advancing energy affordability. I do think it's really important to point out that we didn't identify it being cheaper necessarily, or reducing rates necessarily. Obviously, if that's possible, that's what we're going to do. But I think that really what we're talking about here is affordability, and obviously equity comes into that. How do we advance affordability for everyone equitably, but also really how do we advance value? How do we provide a more valuable product? So that's what I was saying. I really think the improved commodity and affordability go hand in hand in terms of an improved or more valuable commodity. And then, of course, if we are able to accomplish all of these things, really we're trying to support the growth of the green economy. And there's all sorts of legislative efforts in the last couple of years in Connecticut that really shows the importance to the legislature and to the governor of in-state economic growth. So those were really, trying to read the tea leaves of public policy. Those were the 4 objectives for our own process that we identified that we need to be pushing forward in any grid modernization or grid planning process. So like I said, the way we decided to go about that, we had this baseline of distribution of the original docket of what the utilities were doing initially. So there was a question of, okay, so how do we achieve those 4 objectives? And what we decided was, like I said earlier, that really there were some near-term topics that we needed to accelerate the time frame on and really have a concerted effort on to push forward, and then bring that into a more holistic distribution system plan. So there's, like I said, 11 topics. I'm going to take them in chunks. So the first 6 topics that we decided to, like I said, try and move the ball forward on are the ones in front of you. So energy affordability, AMI, storage, EVs, innovation pilots, which is actually a bit of a misnomer. Probably innovation framework is a better way of thinking about that, and then interconnection standards. Let's go down each one real quick. There we go. So for each in the equitable or framework for an equitable modern grid, what we did for all 11 topics was we tried to take the challenges and look at and identify, okay, what are the barriers here to achieving those 4 objectives that I talked about earlier within this topic. And so we tried to then turn those challenges into what we framed as opportunity statements. So what's interesting is, if you look at the stats, Connecticut is the 24th state per capita in energy expenditure. So, our bill and our energy efficiency friends all know these calculations and perspective well, looking at, what is the average bill of a customer? And so we're actually 24th there, but we have, we're neck and neck with the highest rates. Right. So how do we look at both of those things, and where are there specific barriers to increased affordability, particularly for low to moderate income customers and those in vulnerable communities, but also small businesses, right? I think, and this all started, right, this conversation, these opportunity statements started before COVID, right? So I think actually what we're looking at here was just I guess I'll say, just give ourselves some credit, just slightly ahead of the curve in terms of what we've all seen during COVID and those most heavily impacted. So it was an opportunity statement of, okay, what are the barriers? What are we really trying to look at here? And again, it's energy affordability, so folks' ability to pay for their bills, and then how do we address that? What we decided, for example, with this initiative was we didn't really have any answers. So we started a stakeholder process around any specific things that we could implement right away. We started a stakeholder process to get feedback from folks. And then out of this, actually what we did was there's some near-term topics that we could advance. And so we started what we called were 100-day sprints initiatives, where we tasked working groups with going off and figuring out solutions to these tangible problems that were identified through our stakeholder process, and then they would report back to us on solutions, and we've actually been able to issue some decisions effectuating some of those recommendations. So that's just one example of, like I said, there's 11 of these, so I'm not going to go in that level of detail on all of these, but that's an example of one of the objectives and topic frameworks, energy affordability. We found an opportunity statement and tried to see how that fit in with our 4 broader goals, identified barriers, and then tried to effectuate solutions I guess in this case in a non-traditional manner. So like I said, I'm not going to go through each one of these dockets or topics, but I will say I think what was interesting, and actually why don't I go back to these slides. For all 6 of the initial topics, like I said, we wanted to, really the goal was we were fairly certain that all 6 of these topics really would help us achieve our 4 primary goals. And we're trying to accelerate the implementation and or implementation of solutions that would move the ball forward on these 6 topics. So really, we had a similar process for all 6 of these, where we had initial what we called solutions days, where we identified some of them were called solution days, some others were called public forums. But either way, it was to try and identify, just like with the example I gave for energy affordability, near-term solutions from stakeholders, both traditional and non-traditional stakeholders. Okay, what are the solutions here? And, present your solutions. Then the authority staff went back and, based on that, drafted. Energy affordability was a little bit separate. I mentioned the 100-day sprint initiative that we had that was separate. But for AMI, electric vehicles, electric storage, and innovation pilots and interconnection centers was a little bit different too. What we did was, after those solutions days, we then took authority staff went back and drafted requests for proposals, or really it was program designs from stakeholders that we could then take and turn into a straw proposal for reaction from stakeholders and then effectuate a decision and move forward on. So a good example of that, back in May, we had a request for program designs for electric storage program design, and we received, I believe, 6 all of them were fairly robust proposals in that docket. And we just recently, literally last week, issued a straw proposal for stakeholder comment that took all the parts of the stakeholder proposals, put them together, and said, okay, what about this straw proposal? And so now it's out there for stakeholder feedback. And so we're hoping to get feedback and get to a final decision to actually put in place a statewide storage program within Q2 of this year. At least that's the procedural schedule that's been posted currently. So there's different, as you can tell, there's different processes for each one of these 6 topics. But again, it was really about trying to move the ball forward on these topics that we felt like achieved our 4 goals, but just needed to be accelerated a little bit. And then just real quick on interconnection standards, we actually also just initiated, what came out of that process was we did a similar process to energy affordability, where we did a 100-day sprint process. And what was recommended were 2 working groups that would meet quarterly, a technical working group and a policy working group. And so those groups have now been stood out. And this quarter will be the first time that we hold those working groups. Okay, so I'm going to, just for everyone's, as a resource for everyone, there are the 6 topics that I just talked about. The opportunity statements are in the slides, but I'm just going to flip through all of them. So then we have 5 more topics that we had identified to try and move forward in the near to medium term, and those other ones are non-wires alternatives, resilience and reliability programs, and then a DER program analysis and program review. And honestly, one of the things, looking through the stakeholder documents that you all looks like have been working on, I think one of the areas that is probably of most interest that we haven't actually gotten to on this ninth topic with DER and DER analysis and program review is really the locational value and questions around there, which is planned for that docket, but we just haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, so hopefully the at least non-wireless alternatives speaks for itself, hopefully, in terms of what we're trying to do. What they are speaks for itself. What we're trying to accomplish in that docket is to really set up a process. What we learned, and one of the one of the most valuable things that we learned from the underlying docket 171203 was that our EDCs are considering non-wireless alternatives internally, but what that process looks like and how stakeholders would get involved with that is not apparent. And I'm so really this docket is about setting up a process and figuring out how do we ensure that these things are being considered, and what the savings are, and obviously balancing other states have looked at how to incentivize the utilities to look at that. And those are still questions that we're grappling with. We don't really have answers on that, but that's what we're really looking at there. And then resilience and reliability programs, what I want to mention there is really we have, and I'm sure I'm not familiar with the main context, overly familiar with the main context, but I'm sure, obviously, I'm sure that vegetation management programs are a big thing as well for you all. And so really, not only are we looking at our vegetation management programs and other managements to look at okay, what are the key metrics? How do we ensure more cost-effective and efficient programs? But also looking at storm response and resilience, and thinking, asking difficult questions about what is helping us with resilience and what is not, and what are the key metrics there. And then the DER resource and analysis program review is really about, we have a lot of these programs the EDCs administer for residential solar, for C&I solar, for community solar, and the pieces don't really speak to one another all that frequently or well, and so it really it's trying to be a focal point for all these programs, so that we then can later get this to integrate with our integrated distribution plan, and can inform that, and both from a location-based analysis, but just how is this helping us with our climate goals. So I should have mentioned earlier that the first 6 topics that I mentioned, we opened those topics in dockets, investigations into those dockets, what we call reopened proceedings, back at the end of 2019. And so, like I said, we're now at kind of, at least for 2 of them, at the straw proposal phase, which is kind of the end of the non-traditional kind of stakeholder engagement process, and really the more traditional discovery and investigation portion of our proceeding to look into those things. And I'm hoping to have a result in those, like I said, in Q2 of this year. But for these 3 topics, which are actually reopeners 7, 8, and 9, those were initiated in the second half of 2020 and are still kind of ongoing processes and dockets that we're in the middle of investigating on that. And sorry, the other thing I should mention too is one thing we're trying to in all of the dockets, but each of these dockets is a little bit different than one another. But generally speaking, what we're trying to do in all of these dockets is have solutions days at the beginning, identify our objectives and for each of the dockets, and say, okay, traditional, non-traditional stakeholders come present, give us solutions to these problems and opportunity statements. And then from there, either do a robust set of discovery through request for written comments, or request for program designs from stakeholders. And then that's where, after that point, we issue the straw proposal, really mostly to based on the comments that we receive and the information we receive, to get stakeholder feedback and then go from there. So really we're trying to open the process to be more inclusive to non-traditional stakeholders, and add a little bit of process in the middle to make sure we're leveraging what the great work everybody else is doing across the country. All right, and then two more for all of you following along at home on the numbers. There are two more dockets. One we just recently opened, and it's a little bit different than what we originally had envisioned when we released the framework for an equitable modern grid a year and a quarter ago. Really, the RE11 was always supposed to take what we did in the first 10 dockets and then say, okay, what's the implication for rates on all of these things? Does it storage? Do we need a new rate design? EVs, do we need a new rate design? Affordability, do we need an LMI rate? Which we have road forgiveness programs, but we don't have a low income rate in Connecticut. So do we, based on what we've learned in the first 10, what do we need to do in terms of rate design? Like I said, there's that's changed a little bit. We had a special session in September, a special legislative session that added some other things like an interim rate decrease to look at in response to what's going on with COVID. So there's some other objectives that we've added in there too, but really it's looking at, okay, innovative rate designs and implementation of rates that would not only forward our grid modernization efforts, but also the four objectives that I mentioned at the beginning. And then the last one I think is docket, which is actually not last, it's 10th, is based on the deep IRP that I'll mention later, and really ties in with some of the New England energy vision work. It's looking at what we can do and what our processes are that can maybe help with the building block, what we call the building blocks of resource adequacy. For example, we have we can procure about 92% of our load. The state can of our load, and what I mean by that is just annual kilowatt hours. It's not a full service requirement product, but through PPAs we can select up to 92% of our load, and we've selected, I want to say it's 60% currently. So how does that fit in with our standard service procurements and other procurements? Like what does that look like, and other questions that the region's grappling with. So anyway, so those are the last two topics, and then what I think is important to get to and what we're trying to accomplish. Like I said, so we started with the four objectives, identifying those in the context of Connecticut. And then we said, okay, what we're going to do now is we want to push forward these 11 topics because we think we need to accelerate the pathway or pathways on these things. But we want this to come together comprehensively into one plan, at least one plan for each EDC in Connecticut, to then make sure that we are comprehensively and coherently moving the ball forward to accomplish our four objectives. So what will happen is, we're hoping to have to be done with all of our dockets, all 11 of our dockets by the end of this year. That at least was the original plan. This gets into the not the opinion of the authority, but Josh's opinion portion. But the plan as we have laid out is to have those dockets as complete as possible, or by the end of the year, to then order to have a comprehensive order to then say to the utilities, okay, we've done all of these things, and we have the context of your traditional distribution system planning. Okay, we want you to now go back and give us a plan that achieves the four objectives that we listed comprehensively and puts all of these things, all these pieces together. And then you'll come back to us, and of course, we'll have a stakeholder process and our own input on those plans to move forward, and that will result in this integrated distribution system plan that not only has the more traditional elements of distribution system planning that I didn't really get too much into the weeds of today, with all of these other 11 topics that we really feel are important to move the ball forward in Connecticut on. And then what the plan is to have this to be a cyclical process, where so great, these opportunity statements aren't going to go away, right, with all of the 11 topics. So we'll say, okay, great, we found some solutions for these things we need to move the ball forward on, and those are all in the integrated distribution system plan. And then we'll have a process. At that point, we'll take another step back and say, okay, do we still have the right four objectives? And is there anything in the next couple of years that we feel like we need to move the ball forward on quickly? And then we'll do the same type of process. We'll identify those dockets, move those forward at the same time that the EDCs are effectuating their integrated distribution system plan. And then in 3 to 5 years later, we'll bring it back together again to mesh it all into another integrated distribution system plan, and then continue kind of the
multi-year cycles of iteration on that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and learning more about PURA's Equitable Modern Grid Initiative. Please feel free to reach out at any of the contact information on the screen currently, and please go to our website to learn more, which is www.ct.gov/PURA. Thanks again.